The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew. Jesus began to speak to the chief priests and the elders of the people in parables. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a feast for his son's wedding. He sent his servants to call those who had been invited, but they would not come. Next, he sent some more servants. Tell those who have been invited, he said, that I have my banquet all prepared. My oxen and fattened cattle have been slaughtered. Everything is ready. Come to the wedding. But they were not interested. One went off to his farm, another to his business, and the rest seized his servants, maltreated them, and killed them. The king was furious. He dispersed his troops, destroyed those murders, and burned their town. Then he said to his servants, the wedding is ready, but as those who were invited proved to be unworthy, go to the crossroads in the town and invite everyone you can find to the wedding. So these servants went out onto the roads and collected together everyone they could find, bad and good alike, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. When the king came into the look at the guests, he noticed one man who was not wearing a wedding garment, and said to him, how did you get in here, my friend, without a wedding garment? And the man was silent. Then the king said to the attendants, bind him hand and foot and throw him out into the dark, where there will be weeping and grinding of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen. The Gospel of the Lord.
So, my dear brothers and sisters, in order to understand this parable, that we must bear in mind that Jesus is speaking to the chief priests and the elders of the people. Those are the audience for him, the chief priests and the elders of the people. And this would be really those who have been invited to the feast. If you remember, in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 15, in verse 24, there's the story of the Canaanite woman who had approached Jesus, asking Jesus to heal her daughter who was possessed. And Jesus said, I was sent to the household of Israel. And I remember when I was talking here about the text, I was saying that Israel was specially chosen, but chosen for the world. It was not chosen just for itself, chosen for the world. But now Israel has rejected Jesus. They do not listen to him. They are against him. The chief priests, the Pharisees, the elders of the people, they stand up against him because, of course, he's popular. He's known. He's from Nazareth. His mother is Mary. Joseph, the father, is a carpenter, the son of the carpenter. So he's known. And therefore, because of that, he's rejected by his very own, those to whom he had come. And that is why he says in this parable that there were some people who were invited, but they rejected the invitation. They rejected the invitation. And Jesus says the invited have become unworthy. The invited have become unworthy. Why? Because they have openly rejected Jesus. They have said no to him. They stand against him. And we still have that in society today. People who have utterly and wholeheartedly rejected the way of God. And they have gone their own way. What can we do about that? Nothing. The invited have become unworthy. So remember, have in mind the people of Israel, Jewish people to whom Jesus was sent to the household of Israel. They have rejected Jesus totally. And now, Jesus goes no, the man who had prepared this banquet went back and told his servants, since the people who were invited have become unworthy, go into the streets and invite every other person. Now that is symbolic also of the death and crucifixion, the crucifixion and death of Jesus Christ. If you remember in Matthew's Gospel, we hear in chapter 27, verse 51, that when Jesus had died, the curtain of the temple was torn from top to bottom. It was now open, and therefore symbolic of everything is open now for everybody, not only to the household of Israel. All of us have been invited to the feast. Even though we are unworthy, we have been invited. Unworthy as we are, we have been invited. Therefore, the uninvited have become worthy. See the other way around for Israel. The invited have become unworthy, and the uninvited have become worthy, because all of us have been invited to the feast. And we're talking about this feast is nothing other than the feast of the sacrament of the Eucharist that we celebrate every day. That even though we are unworthy, we are all invited. And Jesus says in John's Gospel, chapter 6, verse 37, I will not reject anyone who comes to me. We are all invited to come to this feast, but there is still a problem. That there is one man whom the master of the vineyard goes around, and then he realizes that he's not putting on a wedding garment. Yes, we are uninvited, but we have become worthy. And even though we are unworthy, we have been invited to the feast, we have to put on the right dress, the right garment for the feast. So even though we are unworthy, we have been invited, but us, on our part, we have to put on the right garment. What is the right garment? In the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians, chapter 11, he talks about the Eucharist in a very strong way, and he says that we must examine ourselves and therefore come to receive the body and blood of Christ. We must examine ourselves. And he says that those who do not examine themselves now are eating judgment upon their own lives. And that is why this man came. Not that he was unworthy, he was unworthy, but he had to put on the wedding garments. Then he did not put on the wedding garments, and he was thrown out. That's why St. Paul says that we must examine ourselves and therefore receive the body and blood of Christ. Because those who receive his body and blood without examining themselves are eating judgment upon their own lives. And he goes on to say that many people have become sick and others have died because of receiving him unworthily. And therefore, we must think about this, because most of the time, because we receive it every day, we might feel, it's no problem, we can just receive him. No, we must examine ourselves. We must therefore go to confession. We must make sure that we are in a state of grace before we receive him. Okay? That we must go to confession constantly. That is even why before we start with Mass, we begin with a confitio, which allows us to cleanse ourselves before we come into this sacrament, into the reception of the body and blood of Christ. And that is put in the first reading very well by the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 36, when he says that I will pour clean water upon you and cleanse you from all your uncleanliness. And this he has given us through the sacraments that we receive in the church, and especially the sacraments of baptism and then the sacraments of confession, that prepares us, that makes us to put on the right garments before we are invited to share in the supper of the Lamb, in the meal that he has prepared for each and every one of us. But the good news is, even though we are unworthy, we have been made worthy. Even though we are not worthy, and that's why we say at Mass, Lord, I am not worthy to receive you, but only say the word, and I shall be cleansed. Because really, by our own strength, by our own power, we are not worthy. But we have been made worthy through his death and resurrection. He has given his body and blood for each and every one of us. He says, take this and eat. You For this body, this blood has been shed for you and for all, that sins may be forgiven. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, we have been invited, even though we are unworthy, but we must put on the right garments for the feast. And once we put on the right garments, then we would truly share in the body and blood of Christ, in this great meal that Jesus has prepared for each and every one of us.